Right, good evening, members. It's that time, 7:15, to start the meeting. I'll introduce myself. My name is Councillor John Ball. I'm the Chairman of the Licensing Committee, and this meeting will be broadcast on the Council's YouTube channel. Just a couple of little things about fire and phones. We have no fire drill planned, so if the bell sounds, we'll disappear through the doors at the rear. And I'd be grateful if everyone ensured that their mobile phone was switched to silent, please. If you've any doubt, check now. We have next item 2, which is declarations of interest, and that's to declare the existence and nature of any disclosable pecuniary interest, other pecuniary interest or non-pecuniary interest relating to items on the agenda, having regard to the code of conduct for members and having taken appropriate advice where necessary before the meeting. Do we have any declarations? None at all? Okay, I have none. And coming to the minutes of the previous meeting, this item is to approve as a correct record the minutes of the meeting of the Licensing Committee held on 20th of July 2023. The copy has been previously circulated. I hope everyone has received that and read it. Does anyone have any amendments to propose? Or no? Okay, could I have proposer, Councillor Prime, and a seconder, Councillor Mrs. Parker. And can we vote on that, please? All those in favour? That's unanimous. I must make an announcement this evening that we have 3 apologies. I should have dealt with that on item 1. I'm sorry. We have 3 apologies this evening, which is...
Chairman, we have apologies from Councillor Ramage, Councillor Ayton and Councillor Pell, yep. And Councillor Mason has been appointed as substitute for Councillor Ayton.
Thank you very much. We have no one at public question time that I'm aware of. So moving on to the main item of business on pages 5 to 8 of the agenda, and that's the Business and Planning Act 2020 Pavement Licences Coronavirus Amendment Regulations 2023 to extend pavement licences to 30th of September 2024. And there are some amended clauses to that. So I'll ask John to introduce that, or is it Dan? John.
Thank you, Chairman. As you've rightly said, the report is to brief the Licensing Committee on the Business and Planning Act 2020 regulations, which have extended the provision to grant pavement licences to the 30th of September 2024. The key things to remember is pavement licences granted before the commencement date of the regulations are not affected by the amendments and will expire on the 30th of September 2023. Licences granted after the 9th of August 2023 will expire on the 30th of September 2024. So that's for members to note the changes. The decision that's required today is the revised officer scheme of delegation that's set out in the bundle before you. This change is to assist in processing the applications as expediently as possible for both the customer and for the local authority. And the main change being that in lieu of needing to go to the relevant director, it's now going to be done by the Health and Safety and Licensing Manager in consultation with the Chairman or Vice Chairman as well. So that's the decision today. The specifics regarding the scheme of delegation are obviously in your bundle before you, and I'm happy to answer any questions regarding that. Thank you, Chairman.
Any questions from anyone? Councillor?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, yes, I welcome the report and I'm more than happy to support it. In the world we're living at the moment, anything that we can do to help the businesses and to make the customer experience better must be welcomed and taken forward. Is there anything going forward that we can do to make sure that the businesses are aware of any timescale that they must have to get it in, to be able to carry this onwards after the expiry of the blanket grant, if you like, so that they have every opportunity to be able to grow and expand on this matter?
Thank you. I'll answer this. Yeah, once we have this approved tonight, hopefully, we will send out a communication to anyone who's had a pavement licence to make them aware of the change and the extension for another year. Those members who may not be aware, but this is probably the third or fourth extension now. They are rolling it over year by year, waiting for the permanent piece of legislation which the government believe will introduce pavement licences permanently as a permanent scheme instead of just rolling over year by year. Thank you.
Councillor Peter Short.
Thank you, Chair. Just on that note, it seems to me that the government are just pushing or kicking the can down the road on this, because this has been going on for a few years now, and we keep being told, yes, it's going to come, the legislation is going to come. Have you had any indication of when this change may come? Because it's a situation that has to come back to committee for this rolling extension all the time, and it seems that we should make a permanent decision because we know it works, rather than this temporary stuff all the time.
All I can tell you at the moment is that the permanent changes are in the Levelling Up and Regeneration Bill, which is currently going through Parliament, and it's a huge piece of legislation, and pavement licences is just one small little part. I believe the bill is probably been been looked at for the last couple of years, 18 months, couple of years, maybe even longer. I don't have a time frame, but I do hope. So I believe that they feel that this will be possibly the last one until I say that it's not, and I can see your face now to say that it's not. But I've been advised that it should be coming through soon. But it's although it's based on, although the provisions within the Levelling Up Bill, and it will be a pavement licensing scheme, will be based on this scheme, there will be changes and there will be differences. They are thinking about it a bit more, because as you were aware, this was brought in a hurry, and there will be changes if they make it a permanent scheme. They're also the key thing is they're looking to tie in some licensing requirements with respect to alcohol within the pavement licensing scheme as well. So in theory, if you have a pavement license area, you will automatically be able to sell alcohol within that area potentially, as long as you have the license. Whereas now it's not necessarily the case. It's very much tied up with a separate license. So they're trying to tie the two together.
Councillor Van Duncan.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, John, for that. And I echo what our colleague there said about encouraging business. That's a good thing. And in my area, I've noticed more businesses that, well, I suppose they had to, but now they've kept the outdoor. So that's all very positive. What I wanted to ask is, in general terms, over the last couple of years, has the behaviour, if that's the right term, been acceptable? Have we had problems with the outdoor drinking?
We receive, I'd say, little to no complaints at all. We may get information to say somebody has an area and they don't have a licence, so we then deal with that. But we generally don't receive problems with areas. The terminal hour is 10 o'clock, so because it's 10 o'clock, that may be part of, that may help. If it were to be later, that might become more of a problem. But no, generally very, very little problems at the moment, and fingers crossed.
Good, thank you.
Any further questions? Two now. Councillor Walters, Mrs. Walters.
Thank you, Chairman. Good evening, everybody. It's nice to be back. I wanted to ask a question about the area of licensing for the high streets and the owners and the managers. How are they going to control people wandering outside of that area if they're having alcohol and it's only meant to be in a particular area? How is that going to be managed, do you think?
Well, just so I may have jumped the gun. They're looking at that, but that may or may not come in as part of the changes. Obviously, to be able to sell alcohol, a business would have to have a premises licence, which means that there would be controls. I mean, you go through the consultation, and if a responsible authority or a member of the public had concerns, then could put conditions on licence. So in theory, the obvious choice is a condition of licence, whether that be a mandatory condition or an added condition to a licence to ensure that there are controls in place. Because you're right, that could take place. You could have people wandering down, high streets with,
Councillor Prime.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just quickly, how will this be managed? I know, my experience, pubs and coffee shops have a fenced-off area, but I've noticed recently a fish shop has suddenly got a couple of tables and chairs, and it's moving further and further out. How does that get managed?
I think it would be a case of we would respond to issues, complaints. We're not undertaking, as a team, we're not undertaking proactive inspections. If we found that there were problems, that's something that we could look at, or if we had issues with a particular premises, we could go and look at, because they do have to stick to a plan and to a location. So if they are changing what they are doing, then that's something we need to be aware of, and we can take action with that. Because ultimately, we can, there are sanctions against the licence we can take place.
Okay, thank you.
Any more questions from this side? No. I did have one question myself. You mentioned, Dan, that the terminal hour was 10 o'clock. Now, on last Friday evening, I had the privilege of going out with the police on the regular monthly checks on licensed taxis, on the drivers and on their vehicles. It was quite quiet, and it was mentioned, I thought, in relation to one particular premises, that they had to have the tables and chairs packed away by 8 o'clock. Was that correct, or was it not?
They may have chosen to have them packed away at 8. I mean, what we've said is the latest that we will allow, I believe, is 10 o'clock. So a premises may ask for 8, 6, 2, it depends on what they want. So yeah, that's quite possible. They wouldn't. I'd be a bit more worried if you said 11 o'clock or 12 o'clock. But as long as it's under, then that's not a problem.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, but just to add to that before we go on, it's worth bearing in mind that although the permission's given under this licensing regime, the premises could have conditions attached to its overall alcohol licence that insist on certain things happen, i.e. tables and chairs being put away by a certain time or certain areas not being used. So they would have to all work to, so not one trumps the other. So it's a case of they would have to comply with their conditions for both the tables and chairs and their wider premises conditions attached to that. So it could quite reasonably be that the premises licence stipulates the prohibition of certain areas earlier than 10, 8 o'clock or something like that.
Thank you very much. We have two actions, or two recommended actions on this. The first one is to note that the Business and Planning Act 2020 Pavement Licences Regulations 2023 extend the duration of pavement licences to the 30th September 2024. The second part is to agree the revised officer scheme of delegation with respect to the pavement licences as set out in this report. Can we have a proposer for that? Councillor Schwer.
Yes, Chair. I'd like to move the recommendation as laid out in the report as 2.1 and 2.2.
And a seconder. Councillor Mrs. Parker. We take a vote on that, please. All those in favour? That is unanimous, I think. So, we now move on to item 6, which is the Licensing Committee update for new members and for the substitute this evening. This is normally a very brief kind of breeze through things, which takes less than 5 minutes, but there's quite a lot in this, so you'll be free to ask any questions you wish. Hand over to John Middings.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, as already outlined, there is quite a few items in this, and I don't propose to go through them all in detail, but I will go over them, and if any member has questions afterwards, I'm obviously happy to take them. The first point is an update on licensing applications. As some of you may be aware, we've had a licensing act hearing for the Cosfest Music Festival in between Hedingham and Housestead. The licence was granted subject to conditions following representation from responsible authorities and a number of interested parties. Interestingly or not, the event that licence is for has been and gone for this year. And although we have had some issues highlighted to us, there was nothing of immediate concern for us. We've had, since the last update, we've had 10 driver applications, 10 applications determined by drivers panel. 5 of the cases were determined on the 24th. 2 of these applications were for the grant of driver licences. The first was deferred, unfortunately, in the applicant's absence, and the second was granted. Further 3 cases were determined in respect to existing licensed drivers. The first driver had their licence revoked on the grounds of conduct. The remaining 2 licences were revoked on medical grounds. 4 cases were determined on the 27th with respect to private hire vehicles that did not meet the age criteria set down by the licensing authority. All 4 vehicles were inspected by the panel and deemed suitable to be licensed. A driver's panel was determined on the 15th of August following information by an external partner agency, and that licence was subsequently revoked. We do have a number of applications that still require determination at driver's panel, and unfortunately that work looks like it will continue due to the number of applications and licence holders we now have within our district. We probably will be looking at a way of handling them better rather than dealing them with in bulk, because members may have realised that they are obviously coming up in large groups, and we can look forward to how we can better utilise the system, so we're not having an influx of drivers at a set period of time and try and spread them out across the year. Just matters to note, the Section 182 guidance for the Licensing Act has been revised. It adds sections regarding counter-terrorism and public safety, and the guidance, the relevant changes are in the report, but it obviously puts a responsibility on licensing authorities and applicants and licence holders to have regards to them obviously important aspects. The changes to the temporary events notices and alcohol off licence entitlements. So obviously there was an easement in place during COVID, and that will now continue until the 31st of March 2025. It was due to elapse at the end of September this year, but has been subsequently extended. So that is the main part of that, is to give off-sales ability to licence holders that don't have it. And out of all of the licences that we have within our district, 89 of those businesses have been affected. So they will continue to be able to sell alcohol for off-sales. There's an update about the select committee comments regarding Martin's Law. They're obviously in the bundle there. The key point is that Braintree District Council has an internal working group in place that ensure the Martin's Law requirements are met, and the group is obviously awaiting the amendments, any amendments following the subcommittee's, the Home Select Committee's review. Apologies. There's a gambling white paper affecting the Gambling Act 2005 that was published in April 2023. Now the key points is that basically is part of a greater review, but there are 2 consultations as part of that review that are currently out regarding, or 3 actually, measures related to land-based gambling sector, maximum stake limit, online slot games in Great Britain, and the requirements at a consultation regarding the requirements placed on gambling premises. So there are a number of where relevant, we as the licensing authority will make relevant comments as required. You may or may not be aware of the Tell Us Once service, a service regarding the amount of interactions that someone would need to have with the local authority on someone's death. That now includes licences and permits. It actually is quite relevant to us and does occur quite a lot. And this is obviously a big improvement for all parties here, because dealing with the consequences of licences and permits that someone that's now deceased can be very complex and cause disruption to businesses that need to stay trading. So it's seen as a very positive step, but the licensing team are working on how to integrate that into how we operate. Another point of note, a police-led alcohol intervention checklist and toolkit has been created. It's for police officers regarding alcohol-related incidents. So it's a number of steps and how the police can try and head off issues effectively. There's a point 10, a call for evidence, driver licensing with medical conditions. Now, existing, long-standing members of the committee will know that that is one of the main pieces of work that we do regarding drivers that are attending drivers panel for determination of their application. Obviously, they're professional drivers, they're treated currently in this licensing authority the same as bus and lorry drivers, and held to the Group 2 medical standard. But there are still fluctuations, even in Essex, on how this is handled and how it affects people's ability to hold licences. And the call for evidence, I think, is to try and ascertain what the problems are and whether it needs to be streamlined. Officers continue to make proactive visits on scrap metal dealer sites. It's now a programmed part of our inspection regime, jointly with the police. We have examples of very good compliance with licence holders, and unfortunately we have some premises that aren't necessarily meeting all their duties under the Act. But the key message here is that the work is made a lot easier when we operate jointly with the police rather than separately. Again, the same message comes across for when we do our programmed, that the chairman mentioned earlier, visits with Essex Police each month, mixing between licensing act, i.e. pubs and clubs, and taxis and private hires alternative each month. They continue to be very useful and allow us to do work that we're not always able to do. And another example of partnership work, not necessarily with the police, but with our neighbouring local authorities, the impact of events held at the Chelmsford City Racecourse affect us just as much as Chelmsford due to the location, and we continue to conduct joint visits on large-scale events that are taking place there, and look at ways to improve the impact of a variety of things on our district. And that's a quick run through. If anyone has any specific questions, we're both here to answer them. Thank
you.
Thank you. About a year ago, there was talk of an outlet to be opened in Bank Street. I don't know what you'd actually call it, with slot machines and a mini casino. Do we know what's happened with that?
The information that we have is they have a licence. They continue to have a licence. I believe there was some interactions with other departments, i.e. planning, regarding some issues they had there. I understand just from my own personal knowledge and just from seeing in the town, it looks like someone else potentially is going in there, or that isn't the license holder. But that's not guaranteed. But that's just the impression I got. But currently they have a license; it's in place, and as long as they continue to pay the annual fee or breach any of the controls that are in place, that will remain. And it may be that, from a business perspective, that they see that as a viable option, maybe to cover any future eventualities. But yeah, that's the situation as it is currently.
Sorry, Councillor Shreer.
Yeah, can I refer you back to 7.3, the licensing authority fees in the DCMS, looking at the Gambling Act and the consultation. And you mentioned the fact about their ensuring that the licensing authorities have the funding they need to carry out their licensing and enforcement duties for premises. I'm assuming that we're going to comment on that, because what I'm concerned about is like what we've been through. We've had a period of 0 or 1 or 1.2, 3 or 2% inflation for a number of years. Suddenly now we've had a period of inflation where it's jumped to 12%. We know that our costs have gone up as a council enormously over the last 2 years, and probably will continue to so. So will you, in your responses, indicate the possibility of having that authority that you can increase these licensing fees so that at least it covers all of our costs going forward, and if not more, to improve our services? Obviously they have a value, I know, but and also the enforcement duties. I mean, I'm a bit concerned about that going forward, that we do cover our costs on that over the next time. And I don't know how long that the period of time it was in relation to, so perhaps you could enlighten me on that. Thank you.
The Gambling Act is quite strange, actually. It's the fees were set in 2005, a national level when the 2005 Act was set at that time, and they haven't been amended since. So it is long overdue a review sort of nationally. But interestingly enough, the gambling fees are quite unique because they allow a local authority to set a range up to a certain amount, up to a maximum, where other fees will just set this is the fee. So a lot of authorities did set towards the maximum, and we're not unique to that. They are due a review. So if they do change them, if they do allow us to either set the fees locally or at least increase the maximum, which is probably likely. They're not going to let us do that. They're going to increase the maximum probably. That's probably what we'll look at. But it's important for us if they do that, and we do set the fees at a high level, that we do include, compliance visits and any enforcement we do, because it is quite a small area of work for us. We're quite limited on the number of, for instance, betting premises that we have, and permits that we issue. It's a very small portion of our total work, and because the majority of gambling now taking place in the UK is generally online, and we don't, as a local authority, regulate that at all. That's all done by the Gambling Commission. So that's where the big piece of work is. But I do take your point regarding fees.
Councillor Heath, did you?
That was exactly my point as well. I mean, in this day and age, it's a multi-million-pound business, and the taxpayers of this district that don't gamble should not be paying towards its profits and running. So I think we need to put in the strongest sense that we can that we must be at least cost zero on this. Okay.
Just to try and assure you as best we can, because it's difficult when fees are set to a maximum. So if there are any additional costs, that has to come from somewhere. I mean, there are some fees, for instance, in the Licensing Act, which I know is a different regime, but was set around 2003. They haven't been changed either. So we're getting on for what, 20 odd years. Potentially you could argue that some transactions that we undertake as a local authority, we lose per transaction. So that is something to be bearing in mind. But the general rules for licensing regimes are that they are cost neutral, and there shouldn't be a burden on taxpayers, so to speak. Licensing is unique in that way in terms of how we're funded. We're not funded by the council tax in most situations. We are in a very limited, if there's a few bits that we do, but most of it is funded by the fees.
Councillor Parker.
Thank you. Just a quick question on item 9, the police-led alcohol intervention checklist and toolkit. I was just wondering whether this, is there something similar in relation to drugs, or is that dealt with in a completely different way?
Yeah, there is already one for drugs. I think they've just I think because of the increase in alcohol-related incidents, the police have standardised their response on that. They don't just deal with the incident, that they obviously have a duty to ensure that person doesn't continue just due to either alcohol dependence or problems with alcohol, and that this is a way of an intervention as such at the policing level to try and give the person the support they can to obviously deal with the issue if they so choose, obviously. And it's been set out as similar to the drug version in the same way, where there's a staged response and they deal with it in it's effectively there to assist officers rather than just give a national briefing. They've got something they can refer to and what they should be doing in certain instances.
Just for noting, we come to item 7, which is urgent business. Well, no knowledge of any urgent business in public session, so we close the meeting at 12 minutes to 8, so 19:48. Thank you very much for attending.